Knowing something about the gold standard gives you a little background into the last figure of the four main figures in the Wizard of Oz, the Cowardly Lion. The Cowardly Lion symbolizes William Jennings Bryan. William Jennings Bryan was a popular Midwestern politician, and he has the sad distinction of being a three-time nominee for the presidency in 1896, 1900, and 1908. Each time he ran, he was a loser. As a young politician in 1896, William Jennings Bryan lit up the political world with a famous speech called the Cross of Gold speech. He went from a completely unknown politician to the best-known Midwestern voice of the farmer in the U.S. Now, Bryan was a Democrat, but that didn't stop the Populist Party from twice nominating him as their own candidate for the presidency. Bryan held the same beliefs that the Populists did, that the free coinage of silver would give much-needed financial relief to the everyday farmer of the Midwest. The big ending of this very long speech, it's something like, I think he talked for like over an hour, was this line that you see here on the screen right now. Having behind us the producing masses of the world and supported by the commercial interests, the laboring interests, and the toilers everywhere, we will answer their demand for a gold standard by saying to them, you shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold. Well, if you didn't like my delivery, remember how William Jennings Bryan delivered it just at the beginning of this presentation. Now, why the Cowardly Lion? L. Frank Baum was worried. The economy had somewhat improved by 1900, the time that the Wizard of Oz was written. And in 1900, Bryan was getting ready to run again for the presidency, and Baum was worried that that William Jennings Bryan was going to forget about the free coinage of silver. And so what some have suggested is that he was trying to prompt Bryan to have courage, to stay true to his free coinage of silver beliefs. Whether or not that actually was the case, the free coinage of silver was a huge issue for the average Midwesterner. They saw it as their reason, they could possibly ever get out from under the crushing debts that they face. Here you see a political cartoon in which Republican leader John Hanna is crowning the average American with a crown of thorn while hanging him on a gold cross. As you can see, around his waist is a band called Corporations, the trust that we worked on in our game the other day. For Christians, devout Christians such as populists, this symbolism that they were being sacrificed by capitalism on a cross for greedy purposes really sent a powerful message to them. So the next symbol that we'll be talking about is the Wizard of Oz himself. If I were to ask you to name a president from Abraham Lincoln to Theodore Roosevelt, could you? If you had difficulty, that's because most of those presidents were pretty undistinguished. Why they were undistinguished is that many of them didn't have any initiatives or any program of their own. They were content to allow Congress to dictate terms to them. Congress and the politicians in Congress were responsible for nominating the president in this time period. They made sure that the president acted according to their wishes, not the other way around. If we go to the Wizard of Oz as a story, you'll know that the Wizard of Oz was supposed to solve all their problems. But does he solve the hero's problems? Well, let's take a look at the Tin Man. He gives him a watch. The Cowardly Lion, he gives a medal. The Scarecrow, he gives a brain. Instead of a brain, he gets a diploma. These are not the actual things that they were looking for. He doesn't really give them anything meaningful. He gives them meaningless platitudes, a piece of paper, a bit of tin, and a clock that doesn't do the same thing as a heart. How does he get Dorothy home? He gets Dorothy home by a hot air balloon, which symbolizes all of the hot air that politicians are full of. When Dorothy discovers the wizard, she learns that he's a fraud, that he's a hoax, that he has no real power, that he can't change anything, and that although maybe a nice guy, he really wasn't the person to help the average American. The next symbol that we'll be talking about is the Wicked Witch of the West, which symbolizes the railroads of the West. Far and away, the railroads were the most hated institution by farmers in the Midwest. They had doubled the rates of shipping their farm products to market, even as farmers themselves faced dramatically falling farm prices. Keep in mind that the railroads were constructed in the late 1800s, and they didn't do it on their own. The federal government gave the railroads millions of acres of land, which they sold, and using the proceeds of those sales, helped finance their own railroads. So it wasn't as if the railroads did it completely on their own. The populace wanted to call for a state ownership of all railroads, telegraph, and telephone utilities. If this seems a little odd, well, keep in mind that today Amtrak is largely owned by the federal government, although it's floundering. But most railroads across the world are owned by a governmental agency. Why? Probably because railroads are expensive to operate and require tremendous resources. And they need a certain amount of government subsidy in order to survive. During the time of The Wizard of Oz, American Telephone and Telegraph, AT&T, was responsible for all telephone and telegraph service in the United States. So much so, their monopoly led to crazy prices in these rates. Today, we have a lot of public utilities today. Holden and Princeton each have their own municipal light departments. Princeton's municipal light department famously put up 2 huge windmills on Mount Wachusett, which supplies a huge chunk of their electrical needs. Then Princeton also, a couple of years back, tried to create town-wide internet service as a public utility with very mixed results. Most Princetonians I talk to tell me how bad it is. But in any event, what the populace felt that publicly owned utilities could do was to bring a certain amount of humanity into the rates that got charged, rather than an endless drive for profit. So let's take a look at what kills the witch. What kills the witch is water. Why water? Well, obviously, for a farmer, it has a symbolic effect of helping nurturing their crops and improving the harvest. For another effect of that might be that if inflation happens and farmers get some debt relief, what may end up happening is that there might be a bright new day for America's farmers. So where are we all heading with this? We're heading to a revolution. And the revolution is that farmers were trying to peacefully change a system that they felt did not work for them. And they wanted democratic action. However, the warning is that, like Dorothy, a cyclone could come along and pick up our nation's house and toss it someplace we don't want to go. Baum thought of socialism as an evil. Even though many populists had socialist economic ideas, socialists are not, in a moral sense, along the same kind of line of thinking as the populists. You know, there's no elimination of alcohol and the other kind of social issues that the populists cared about. Baum knew that the country had to change in a fundamental way. And if it didn't, pressure was building to have a revolution much like one that took place in France or one that took place in this country in 1776. When people feel that government does not work for them and works for somebody else, and that paying attention to government is pointless, that's when people get frustrated and angry. A lot of people today in the United States are angry in a similar way. It'll be interesting to see, as our country progresses, if the government responds to their needs in order to avoid a similar kind of thing. All right, well, that's the end of the lecture. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me or save them for tomorrow. All right, have a good day.